For the afternoon, well, as it is now afternoon, there are going to be 3 sessions of about 1 hour. And the first one is just you listening to me. I might ask you 1 or 2 questions, but mainly it's me. But then for the last 2 sessions of today, it will be mainly you. I will start you off with some information, and then you'll be doing some work on a couple of workshop exercises. And we'll have the next break is after me, I think. After this one, yeah. We'll have a short break and then carry on till the end. What I'm going to be talking about now is logically the next stage. Before we had lunch, I was talking to you about putting your consortium together, identifying partners, identifying the work package structure, identifying the types of expertise that you're going to be using and needing in your consortium. Now, for the next hour approximately, I'm going to be focusing on actually writing the words. What do you write in your proposal? Because it's what you write in your proposal that will determine whether you get the money or not. So I'm going to be focusing on your strategy to get the money. So, excellence in project proposal writing. Oh, there's, for one of our previous courses, it's about 3 years, 4 years ago, quite a while ago, I don't change things much, so it's still relevant. There's a YouTube video of this particular presentation that you can always refer to if you can't access whatever it is that Bosko is doing over there, recording it.
Yes, I am. And this will be...
This isn't being submitted to the Cannes Festival or anything like that.
I was thinking about it. Well, anyway, it will be made available for the participants.
Okay. So in that case,
eventually, when it is processed, you can refresh your memory about the key points, and you will have these videos available.
So, but that doesn't mean to say that you can quietly do something else while you're talking. So, okay. Bosko referred to this proposal writing guide. This is that many pages, and at least nobody put their hand up. Part of that guide is what I've got here on this slide. When I was working for the Ministry of Science, I wrote this document specifically targeting a particular type of FP7 project proposal. As it's no longer available in Horizon 2020, I modified it to make it more general for writing project proposals as a whole. And it is somewhat shorter than the whole guide, so if you're interested, you can ask for a copy afterwards. So, what's this going to be about? It's going to be about getting the money for your project. And you've already heard that Horizon 2020 is not easy. It's a big challenge. And the success rates are less for Horizon 2020 than they were for FP7. And for many calls, for many sub-programs, we're talking about success rates that are less than 10%. So what I'm going to be talking about today is what you need to do for yours to be not just above that 10% that gets funded, but for yours to be at the top of the list. So I'm going to focus on how you can get your project proposal to be the one that's at the top, which should guarantee that you get the money. So writing a successful proposal, it needs the right philosophy. And I'm going to be talking as much as anything about philosophy. Philosophy is a way of thinking. It's a way of using your brain to identify what you need to write. So when you are putting the information together, you need to be thinking in the right way to know that you're putting the right information together. And I find that a lot of scientists struggle with this philosophy. They want to do what they are used to doing. And if you do what you're used to doing, you won't get the money. Because you have to think the same way that the Commission thinks. However obscure that might be, however strange it might be. And therefore you aim to master the philosophy for success. So, here's a press release that came out about a year ago from the Commission. Great joy, rejoicing. Commission press release. SME Instrument celebrates, like that word, it celebrates first great success after the first cut-off date, which was round about now last year. Great success for the Commission means great failure for you. Because at that first cut-off date, the success rate for those that actually got the money to go through to the next phase was 6%. So what's that? That's one proposal in 17 on average. You see, so greats don't think the same way that the Commission thinks in terms of success. The Commission wants the whole wide world to submit proposals. For them, the more proposals they get, the better. But for you, that's bad news. You've got to think in terms of how do you make yours one of that 6%. And we're in a number of Horizon 2020 consortia at the moment, BSF as a partner. And these proposals have been submitted recently in the last few weeks, so we don't know what the results are going to be. And for one of them, the success rate will be even lower. And it's for that topic, H2020, Int Society 2015, Int 10, Europe as a Global Actor. And it's a research and innovation action, and the number of proposals that were submitted was 26. 26. And on average, they will fund one. Right? So 1 out of 26, that's 3.8%. So our proposal will have a 3.8 success rate on average. I didn't take any part in writing this proposal. It was Bosko who was running this one. So what our results are going to be, I don't know. Bosko did say, he's gone, isn't he? Bosko did say at the end, oh, I think it's looking quite good, Steve. It's not bad, actually. It's come together a lot better than I thought. So I asked him, oh, is it going to be the best? And he said, well, probably not. So that probably means we won't get the money, but anyway.
So,
yes.
I would like to ask if more than one proposal can get fund from one call.
It will depend on the topic area, it will depend on the call. You have to look at two numbers to work that one out. No, three numbers. You look at the amount of money that is predicted in total for that call. You then count up the number of topics for that call. You then look at the expected budget for each topic within that call. Then you use those three numbers to work out how many proposals on average are going to be funded for each of those topics. And in most cases, for the areas of science that I'm involved with, it is one. You will sometimes find that they have money for two. There are some areas, particularly in the area of health, where you will get 3 or 4 funded for every topic, which is fine. It means that, well, it's fine potentially, but the trouble is if you have 100 proposals submitted and they fund 4, your success rate is still no better than this one, you see. So, on average, the success rate, well, if you look at the official figures, they say it's about 14%, which is lower than it was for FP7. But from the information that's given in the Cordis database that's publicly available, that success rate is actually lower. It's more like 12%. So I've used 13% as a sort of average. But that's still, you see, one proposal in 30 minutes, about one proposal in 7, 8. So your philosophy, therefore, is to make sure that your proposal is the best, which means that you are going to be effective at competing. And competition is an important word to remember. You are going to be effective at competing against all of the others who also want the same money. Because typically they will give the money to only one proposal, depending on the funding scheme. So winning the silver medal in most cases doesn't get you any prize. So there was one proposal that I wrote for FP7 which came third. So a bronze medal in the Olympic Games. It's not bad, that. But in my case, coming third, I got no money. See? So your target, your philosophy has got to be to make yours the best that the evaluator is going to read. So I'm going to be talking about that for the rest of this presentation. Just a little bit of extra information. For those of you who are in private companies, so far the number of partners in consortia that come from companies, PRC according to the code, is about a third. So a little bit over 30% of the partners are private companies. So how do you make your proposal the best? And that information is illustrated schematically in a figure on the next two slides. So these two slides, this slide and the next one, they are your key to success. It doesn't matter what the words say, just look at those two slides that are coming up. That's the first, and then the next one. And that, graphically, as an image, tells you everything that you need to know for your proposal to get the money. So, the first one. What can you see inside the yellow box? Can somebody describe what they can see? Because I see on the photocopier it's come out just sort of more or less black. Right? Two blue bars. Can you tell me how tall they are? Can you tell me how tall the blue bars are? It looks as if one is a different size from the other, isn't it? Well, okay, but probably the one on the right is a bit taller than the one on the left. But if I was to give you a tape measure and I asked you to tell me how many centimeters, would you be able to tell me? No. Not easy, because they sort of fade away, don't they? So you can't see the end of them easily. So that's one image. Remember that for the future. And here's a second version of that same figure, but this time there are a number of differences. So it has the same two blue bars, but if I was to give you a ruler or a tape measure to tell me how many centimeters they are, would you be able to tell me? Is there any fog? Do the bars disappear into the sky gradually? No, they are well defined. There's also now a clearly defined step ladder, the red step ladder, joining those two bars together. And there's also, you may have noticed that there's a scale on the left-hand side. So you could, if I put numbers on that, I could actually quantify that. So Those are the two figures that I want you to think about, because those are important in identifying which proposals are going to get the money and which are going to fail. Now, you've seen this figure before yesterday, yes? Well, no. It's the same but slightly different. I've rotated it slightly. So now we have the European Commission is up at the top instead of to the northeast. But essentially, this is the way that the cycle works. You have the European politicians coming up with ideas to be converted into policy for Europe in one area, in one sector or another. So the politicians determine EU policy. Policy is implemented through the European Commission. A lot of civil servants doing a lot of something, writing, typing, having lunch. And part of that implementation by the European Commission is in the way of funding schemes. So there will be funding schemes like the LIFE programme, Youth in Action for aspects of society, and so on. And Horizon 2020 is one of those funding schemes. The funding schemes will always have beneficiaries. This is what the policy is going to be benefiting. And the politicians want there to be impact for their ideas. But when I talk about impact, it shouldn't really be just impact the same size as everything else on that slide, but it should be impact. And you know that for Horizon 2020, there is much more focus on impact in Horizon 2020 than there was for Framework Programme 7. So you do need to make sure that you think about impact. And you want your project to get money from Horizon 2020. So there's your project wanting funding from H2020, and your project is going to have its own impact because your work is going to result in some output at the end of the project. Now your impact, therefore, has got to contribute to their impact. And their impact is going to be at the European level. So you need to make sure that your project is going to have impact, not just for what you want to, but impact that will be seen by the evaluators at the level of Europe as a whole. So this is the way the cycle works in terms of your approach to putting your proposal together. You need to be focusing on their impact. So your project needs to result in significant impact. And that means that you need to be able to convert this version of that figure, where the bars disappear into the distance. This is the version of the figure for the majority of proposals, the ones that are going to fail. So the ones that don't get the money are going to look like this. Where we have now the vertical axis on the graph is now a measure of the impact that your project is going to have. And because you don't have well-defined starting point, you've got a poor needs analysis, you may have poor definition of how to get to the finishing point in terms of the activities, poor definition of the finishing point in terms of the impact analysis, then you're going to have bars that have got fog at the beginning and fog at the end, as far as the evaluators are concerned.
Sorry. I would
Yes.
like to ask, yes, there is a call within the proposal. It has found suitable by the EU Commission to be funded to start the project. We have that impact, but how does this impact is measured at the end of the project? For example, we write a lot of things for impact and we get results. These are also measured and degree?
It's difficult for me to give you a simple answer to your question without knowing what the project expected impacts were. Because this is what the Commission and the evaluators will be looking at. They will be comparing what you say you're going to do and get from your project with what they have described in terms of the expected impacts.
And does sustainability issue being watched after the project also?
Once your project is finished and the money has stopped, as far as I'm aware, there is no further action taken to see what happens next. In most cases, well, in the earlier framework programs, you had an exploitation plan. There was a TIP. This was some years ago, where you had to write down what would happen after the project is finished. But now, as far as I'm aware, the project goes from day one to day end, the last day of your project. And then you write the final report and off it goes. And as far as you're concerned, that's the end of it. Whether you continue with that, it's not part of the project. So you're formally not allowed to do any work on the project after the final day. So you have to be able to claim impact on the basis of what you expect to do. And what happens afterwards, sustainability? Well, you see, sustainability will be written into your proposal. And if you haven't written it in convincingly, you go up here during your project, if the money stops and it goes down there again, well, you see, you probably won't get the money. So you've got to make sure that you write in sustainability so that the progress that you make will be maintained.
There is, let's say, a very small element of post-project monitoring, let's call it like that. When they post out to you, sometimes it's even an interview, somebody on the phone. Sometimes it's also commission questionnaires, etc., where they ask you to say things like anything from what was the final gender balance of the project, or how many jobs did you create, or whatever. So they ask those, and I got it from, let's say, 1 to 3 years after the project. However, upon saying all of that, I don't think they used to, let's say, inform on the particular partners the more generic program-related activities. Was Horizon
planning for the future?
Planning for the future, yeah. So I don't think there's any. I know in national programs there's a lot more precision on that, but in the EU programs not really.
You could also notice by the time that the end date of the project is approaching, that your project officer is going to be more and more keenly interested in your deliverables, filing the reports, getting it all cleared up, and moving to the next things.
Well, you might be right. One thing I don't mention that, but I think this is quite interesting. I think for people who haven't been involved in FP7 so much in 2020, what I've noticed is an incredible difference. Essentially, they're already implementing Horizon 2020 ideals at the end of FP7 projects, right, to do with innovation and exploitation. So it used to be kind of in the last review talk a little bit about exploitation. Now even in mid FP7 reviews they're talking about exploitation. And in Horizon 2020, in let's say some pre-work we've done, they're already talking about exploitation in the first 6 months, right? Which is, I think, a bit nuts because you don't know what you're going to do. But the exploitation topic is, incredibly important in Horizon 2020. So it must be really precise.
So talking of precise, this is what your project proposal is going to look like if it gets the money. So here we have a well-defined starting point, well-defined finishing point, so that you can see clearly how much impact your proposal is going to give to the project. So where you start from is well-defined, where you get to is well-defined, and also how you get there in terms of the activities. Those are also well-defined. So this is your target when you're writing your project proposal. Yes, unfortunately, that's not the only criterion that you need to consider. Because when I said it was impact, which is a vertical axis, it's not actually impact alone. It's impact per unit cost. So it's the impact that you claim your project is going to have divided by the cost of your project. And it's a concept that is important for everyone to understand, because if the Commission gets two proposals which claim the same impact, the one that is cheaper will get funded, assuming that the costing of the activities is realistic. If somebody doesn't know about costing and they say it's going to be very cheap for us to do this, and the Commission sees that it's unrealistic, then they won't get the money. It has got to be realistically costed. So it's impact divided by cost that's important. Unfortunately, that's not the only criterion that you need to consider, because Horizon 2020 is a funding program based on research and innovation. And the European Commission will fund only excellent research. So if the quality of the science that you propose for your project is not competitive at the European, if not the world level, then you will not get the money, because the impact of poor quality science is going to be low. So you also need to consider not only the impact divided by the cost, but it's also the impact for the quality of the science. And the European Commission will not fund poor quality research. So you must know that your research is competitive at the world level, and only you will know that. So people like Bosko and I, we can't tell you your research is rubbish. We can't tell you your research is wonderful, because we're not experts in your research. So you do need to have very clear vision on the quality of the research that you plan to carry out. So those are the criteria that you need to consider. But how do you get rid of the fog in the bars? So I've just shown you two boxes, one with fog in the bars and the other without the fog. And I say that you just do that. Get rid of the fog. How do you do that? This is your starting point. So let's start by getting rid of the fog in the first bar. And you do that by considering the inputs that will go into your project. So you need to provide a needs analysis to show that the project is needed, state of the art, to demonstrate that you are not reinventing the wheel, for example. Partner justification. You have to show the evaluators that all of your partners are in there because they are needed, and not because they're friends of yours. You also need to provide evidence of existing excellence. Existing capacity. Do they have the resources? Do they have all the technical support, the administrative support, to be able to manage the Horizon 2020 project? Have they done it before? Can they provide evidence of a good track record? Because if they've done it before, then there's a much higher chance that they can do it again than somebody who's doing this for the first time. So those are the inputs. And once you've described all of this, you've now got definition to your first part. So now you know where you're starting from. That means that realistically you can plan objectives. You can plan to claim where you will get to once the project is finished, because you know where you're starting from. You've got rid of the fog on the left-hand side. So that will then allow you to define your objectives, and now you can start to work on the right-hand bar which is at the end of your project. So then you've got to consider the outputs in terms of the funder's impact, which will be the expected impact for the topic. Stakeholder impact, beneficiaries impact, the sustainability that we've already talked about. Value for money, you've got to demonstrate that you're using the money wisely. And also publicity. If nobody knows what your project is about, why should they give you the money? So you've got to make sure that other people know about the project, its plans and progress. So once you've described all of this, you now have defined the right-hand bar, which is the outputs. So the difference between the inputs, where you're starting from, and the outputs, where you know you will get to by the end of the project, that difference is the activities that will be carried out. So once you've defined the first bar and the second bar, then it tells you what activities you have to do. So, project activities, this will be a combination of resources, increasing capacity, you may have to buy equipment, you may have to hire new staff, and they will do work, activities of one sort or another. So, once you've described your new resources and the activities that will be needed to go up the ladder between your two bars, then this is your project proposal. Now, where you put that information in your project proposal, that will be determined by the application form. So it won't necessarily be all of the inputs, they go in the first 10 pages, and all of the outputs go in the last 10 pages. It will depend on what is required by the application form. But essentially, this is the type of information that you need to provide. So, that's how to get rid of the fog in the two bars, but it still doesn't necessarily make your proposal the best, the one that gets to the top of the list. When I was working for the Ministry of Science in Serbia, I was reading a lot of project proposals for FP7, and I identified 4 consistent problems that scientists were having. So they're listed here. The first one is, irrespective of how intelligent they are, people are unable to read and implement instructions. I used to think it was a Serbian problem until I went to Newcastle University to talk with the EU project officer there, and she said to me, without any provocation, she said, "Oh, Steve, I'm having big problems with my scientists. They don't bother to read the instructions." So that made me feel good. That made me feel that it's not something to do with Serbia. But everybody has problems following the instructions. And I've got an example coming up that I'll tell you about in a minute or two. Statements are made without any supporting evidence, so evaluators are not convinced. We are the best research institution in Europe. Okay, prove it. All right? Give me the evidence. But very often people don't bother to provide the evidence. The third problem is insufficient details are given of activities that will be carried out to convince the evaluators of impact. Because after all, your project is going to be somebody doing some activities, somebody doing some work. And if you don't describe with sufficient information, sufficient detail, what that work is going to be, how will the evaluators know that you will get from down there to up there, and not sort of somewhere there? So you have to provide sufficient details to be able to convince the evaluators of impact. And the last one is a particular problem that everybody will have, and that is that the text of different parts of the proposal is not consistent, so evaluators get confused. You might say 5 training visits on page 10, and by the time you've worked out the budget, it will only fund 4. So you say on page 35, we shall have 4 training visits. Oh, really? But on there it says 5. So which one is correct? So those are the 4 major types of problems that you have to overcome.
So, slightly a tangent, but Steve mentioned the instructions. In my bag, I've got the model financial agreement guide. Yeah, so this is how you, let's say, some of the financial and organizational aspects. So this is one document actually. It's printed out, double-sided, and 2 pages per side, right? So, and that's the main document. But this kind of says it's a little bit tricky sometimes, you know. That's and by the way, I haven't read it yet. It's been in my bag now for about 1.5 years to read, and I carry it around with me because I think this time I'm going to read it on a plane, and I've never read it yet.
It's really intellectually challenging.
Yeah, it's difficult.
This is what I was saying earlier this morning, that you start off by doing a lot of reading. You see. So, okay, I've got some examples now of each of those 4 challenges. First, not reading and implementing the instructions. You have to make sure that you do what they say and not what you think would be a good idea. Read the funding objectives, the eligibility criteria, and the impact expected for the project, as well as the evaluation criteria that Bosko referred to yesterday, and the guide for applicants, and then you do exactly what they want you to do. So, for example, I don't know if it does say this in Horizon 2020, but if it says maximum length 1 page for a particular section, don't write 2 pages. And you might think, well, it's an obvious thing to do. And when I was working for the ministry with FP7, most of my scientists did provide only 1 page. But I had one that would send me 2 pages. I had another that was about 5 pages. And the winner, I think his turned out to be something like 13 or 14 pages long. Information that should have gone into a different section, he just put in the section that said maximum length 1 page. Now, if you do that with Horizon 2020, where there is a 70-page limit for most of their project proposals, any page over that 70-page limit will be stamped with a watermark to say it's over the limit, over page limit, and the evaluators are instructed to ignore pages that are over the page limit.
It's not rejected as
Oh no, they will warn you that you are about to upload a file that's too long. So you get a warning, and then you say, oh, I can't be bothered with that. No, I'm going to press it anyway. If you do that, then the excess pages are watermarked so that the evaluators immediately know that they should ignore the information on those pages.
There were some calls in FP7, I don't know whether it happened again in Horizon 2020, which basically were, if you were 1 page over, they rejected the whole proposal. Yeah, and they really did that. I don't think they will do it in Horizon 2020.
They won't reject it.
No, they really rejected the whole thing. I don't think they will do it in Horizon 2020.
No, they won't. But they will tell the evaluators, ignore any pages that are over the limit. Which may not be a problem if you've got 2 pages of references at the end of your documents, so you can afford for them not to be in, perhaps. But try to keep to the limit if you can. The instructions should be so easy to implement, but the majority of proposal writers don't do it. Okay, I've got, this is an example from Horizon 2020. And this is based on our previous course here that we gave in Brussels, in this room, in fact, in December of last year. And I remember that I was giving this talk, the same talk as I'm giving to you now. The words were different, but the slides, larger the same. Sitting in this table here, just here, there was a lady from the UK who was interested in writing a project proposal in aspects of health. And in January of this year, she asked me, could I give them some advice with their proposal? So I spent 2 days working with them, making comments on their proposal. And one of the one of the comments that I wrote, I've put on here, don't bother with all the text, just look at some of it in red. And I said, although you pasted the guidelines for section 1.3 in yellow highlighting at the beginning, much of the text seemed to ignore the guidelines. So here was somebody who had been on our course the previous month. She writes a proposal during the Christmas and January, sends it to me to review, and I find that she has ignored the guidelines. And there she was, sitting just 1 meter in front of me. So you might think, well, everybody followed the instructions, it's obvious. But here was somebody on our course who obviously didn't. I'm pleased to say that they did change their text as a result of this. And in fact, I had an email from her about 10 days ago saying, I wanted to share with you the news that we have just heard that our Horizon proposal that you helped with has been successful. So I'm pleased to say that she did get this proposal funded. So, but it just goes to show that although we can tell you, you should do this, once you go away out of this room, you go back to your own countries, you go back to your own labs and environments, I can guarantee that you will forget it. You see? So you have to force yourselves to follow the instructions. All right? So that's one example. A recent example. Here's another example of not reading and implementing the instructions. Here's the expected impact. In fact, it's for that same topic. It was on tobacco-induced diseases. And here are 3 of the expected impacts. The first one is not a problem. To demonstrate the link between the interventions and outcomes in lung diseases, you should be able to do that. To develop lower-cost therapeutic options for smoking cessation, blah, 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 not a problem. This one, to contribute to the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. Well, that requires you to do some effort, some background reading, to find out what those goals are. If you don't bother to read the document and you think, oh, well, I can't be bothered with that, then it means that you're not going to get the maximum score. So please make sure that where you are expected to provide information, you do put in the effort to write the relevant words. If you ignore implicit instructions for any of these impacts, then you don't get the maximum score. No evidence for statements. You have to be intelligent in implementing the instructions. You have to identify what words mean. And every word has its own particular meaning. Not in terms of a dictionary definition, but in terms of what you need to do to respond to that word. So I've got an example that came from FP7. It's been printed out in your handout, so you will know what the answers are. But it said here, blah, 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 lots of words. We want close cooperation with at least 3 European outstanding partnering organisations. And that was their italics and not mine. And the word that is important there is actually outstanding. It's not just outstanding, it's outstanding! Because outstanding is not just typical, average, normal, regular. outstanding means that they are up here. So how will the evaluators know that they are up here if you don't provide any evidence? If all you say is, we have 3 outstanding organisations for partnering activities, and then carry on with your proposal, where is the evidence to show that they are outstanding? So you need to make sure that for that one word, just one word in that document, for that one word, your partners need to provide you several pages of evidence. They need to provide you the evidence of all their publications in Nature and Science, their Nobel Prize winners, all their other prizes and awards that they've won over the years, the number of invited speakers that they've had, the number of visiting workers that have wanted to work with them, the number of PhD students that they have trained over the years. You've got to provide the evidence. Otherwise, how will the evaluators know that they are outstanding? Now, that is just one word, taken from one sentence. And in fact, in those words that are on that screen, there are actually 5 words where you have to write something. And that's true for all of the text describing what the proposals have to be about. You have to provide the evidence. Not sufficient detail. I've invented these texts so they're not real, but I've put them together to illustrate a particular problem. And that is in terms of the detail that's provided. This is text, and I would read this quite regularly, for a training visit as part of the activities. So one of our young R&D scientists will spend 1 month in project year 1 at Institute X in Paris to be trained in how to use an ABC machine. So that's fine. You might think, there's no problem. We know what's going to happen. But if you compare that text with the one that I've got lower down, it is, of course, longer, but it's longer because it provides more information. If you look at the text in blue, our institute currently has no ABC machine, though we plan to buy one in project year 1, as it is essential to develop the diagnostic test of objective 4. This is our needs analysis, providing the evidence that the training visit is going to be required. The text in black is a description of the activity. One of our talented scientists will analyze plasma DNA in the Institute of Dr. X in Paris for 1 month immediately before commissioning our ABC machine. Dr. X has used ABC since 2000. So this person's got 15 years experience of using the equipment. So that should tell the evaluators that the person knows how the equipment works. Furthermore, she has 2 machines, one of which is regularly used to train visiting workers. So here is the statement that not only has this person got 15 years experience, but they also already train visiting workers. So here's the evidence that the quality of the training ought to be good. So that is the description of the activity itself. And the final text in red, upon return to our institute, the young R&D scientist will help commission the new ABC machine and give training in its use to others to ensure dissemination and sustainability of the newly acquired expertise. So there we have an example of an impact analysis. So you see, there are more words here. I admit it's longer, but in terms of convincing the evaluator that it's going to deliver, it's going to have an impact for the training, there's much more evidence here than there was in the previous one. So make sure you define the activities sufficiently to give the evidence of your objectives that they will be achieved.
I'm going to come back to that point just to reinforce the message. This often become sort of mental habit while you're writing the project proposal. Most of our work while we're doing pre-evaluation comes down to coming back to each one of the statements as the one that was initially presented, which will not usually result in high marks of funding, and checking whether you have needs analysis, sufficient data description, and impact analysis that will guarantee the impact to the evaluator. So this is something that you gradually can develop as just a way of thinking and coming back to each one of the statements and checking whether you have all three parts.
What Bosko was saying is actually just reinforcing what I was telling you at the beginning. It's philosophy. It's the way your brain thinks. You've got to be thinking this automatically. You don't need, or you shouldn't have to read instructions that will tell you, do this. It's got to be up here. And it won't happen overnight, as the example that I gave from our training course in December. You've got to work at it. So, here's another way graphically of illustrating the point that I was making about the detail for an activity. So here we have our well-defined starting point, and the activities are going to take us to our finishing point. In terms of a Gantt chart, timelines for each of the activities, you can identify easily enough how long each activity is going to last. But if you don't provide the detail, how do you know how far in the vertical direction that activity will take you? So this is really why it's essential to provide enough details. The final problem area is consistency. And I've got two examples which are actually from project proposals. One from FP7 and another one from Horizon 2020. And the first one says, if you give improving staff management skills as a project objective, make sure you describe this somewhere in the activities. And this was a proposal where amongst the objectives they say, we plan to improve the management skills of our senior staff. And then it disappeared. Didn't occur anywhere else in their proposal. So they had obviously forgotten about it, or just assumed that the evaluators would realize that it would increase their skills. So that was the first example, and the second one came from a Horizon 2020 proposal which said, under impact, the state-of-the-art searchable knowledge base using Confluence knowledge management software that Work Package 3 will produce. Well, I read Work Package 3, and this wasn't mentioned anywhere in Work Package 3 text. They had called it a different name. I mean, there was something about software there, but they didn't call it Confluence knowledge management software. You see, so as far as I was concerned, where is it? You haven't described it. So it's very easy for you to make mistakes in consistency because you will write the text bit by bit over several weeks or months. But the evaluator of your proposal is going to read it in one day, a few hours, from page 1 to page 100 and whatever. So they will see very easily the inconsistencies where you have said one thing somewhere in the proposal, but you've changed it somewhere else. So you have to be very careful to check for those. So those are the four major problems. I've got a couple of slides now on the activities, and then I'll finish off. Your project, whatever it's going to be, whether it's Horizon 2020 or any other funding source, your project is going to be somebody doing some work. So somebody is going to be doing activities, tasks, work, whatever you want to call it. Now, your proposal, therefore, is going to be evaluated on what you write for the activities that you plan to carry out. because that will determine whether you achieve the objectives that the Commission is looking for. So, how much detail is needed to convince the evaluators? And the answer to that question is, I haven't a clue. I don't know. Because it will depend on many factors. It will depend on such things as your evidence of previous experience. If you've done it before in 3 or 4 previous projects, then it's probable that you don't need to describe it in a lot of detail because the evidence is already there from your previous work. But if you are doing this technique for the first time, then you will need to provide more evidence that you know how it works and that you will get it to work. So that's one aspect. The activity is important to achieve in terms of the project objectives as a whole. Is it a key objective, in which case you must convince them that the activity is going to be achieved, or is it one of your minor sub-objectives, like staff management skills, in which case you don't need to say quite so much. Also, other supporting detail that you might be able to give somewhere else in the form. You don't need to repeat it somewhere else. The space available, and also in terms of the abstract, whether you have any character limit or not. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a genuine work package text. So this was the first draft of part of the text for one of the work packages in one of our projects. And I've got 5 headings at the top. Background grey, I've got why. Asking the question, why are we going to do this? If you like, the objective would be in blue. What is in yellow, how is in green, and the result is in purple. So if I now put the colours on this text, you can read it afterwards because there's quite a lot there. You will see that there's only this short part of the text at the top which describes the how. How are we going to do the work? And effectively, it's how you do the research that's going to determine its quality. The quality of what you do is going to be determined mainly by your description of how you are going to do the work. So you can see we've got plenty of information about the objectives with the aim to quantify differences, blah, blah, blah. We've got a lot of background information explaining one of the methods that are going to be used, but there's not a lot of information on how. I'll come back to that later on in the section under impact. Finally, when you're presenting your proposal, you've got to think about the evaluators. You're going to be evaluators in a couple of hours. So it's going to be at the end of our training course when you will be evaluators yourselves. So you try to put yourselves now in the position of the evaluator reading somebody else's proposal. You, writing the proposal, have got to keep them awake. Now it's only Thursday today, but it could be the evaluator gets to your proposal Friday afternoon. All right? It's been a long week. 6 or 7 proposals he or she has had to read so far. So your job is to keep them awake and focused on what you are writing. So make sure that the way that you present your information is going to keep them alert, awake, and interested. So use headings, subheadings, numbers, use underlining, use sections, put in boxes to emphasize information. Use occasional figures, images, graphics. Use a table here and there, because just word after word, a sea of words, page after page, for 100 pages, is going to be extremely boring for the evaluators. So make sure that you try to keep them awake by presenting an attractively prepared document. So, summarizing with a couple of slides. So this is summarizing your philosophy for success. First, you need to get rid of the fog in the two bars. Check all the evaluation criteria that are implemented. If it's research, make sure it's world class. Read and implement all the instructions, give evidence for statements and enough detail. Make sure your proposal text is consistent, and make sure your proposal is good value for money. And then your proposal will be the best that is presented for evaluation. And when it gets to the evaluators, they should be saying to themselves, this is taking a long time to appear. This looks a good quality proposal with very competitive ideas from proposers who followed all the instructions, excellent project concept, clearly justified and implemented with a convincing amount of detail. It looks as if the proposed project will be managed competently and will have a significant impact, excellent value for money. Indeed, it looks the best proposal that I have reviewed. So I shall give it a maximum score in every section, and I recommend they give the money. So, that's your target.
Is that a real one?
No.